Diary of a Man in Despair. Friedrich Reck. November 1939.
I am writing this in Munich, which is still reeling from the attempted assassination in the Bergerbraukeller. The newspapers are weeping crocodile tears about the cowardly, murderous gangsters who dared attack the greatest German of all time. But there are, I think, probably no more than 1,000 native Munichers who are not dejected because the attempt failed. The journalists joke cynically about their own articles. The official version has it that Otto Strasser placed the bomb for the British intelligence service. This has produced loud laughter. No one doubts that the whole display is a bit of pyrotechnics set off by the Nazis themselves. The fireworks cost nearly a dozen lives, but they serve to whip up hatred against the English and to provide Herr Hitler with the halo of a martyr. I knew Otto Strasser only through his letters. Despite his Bavarian origins, he began calling himself a Prussian Jacobin in the confusion of 1932, and pursued me throughout the entire summer of that year with indecent political proposals. His brother, Gregor, who was killed in the Rome Putsch, was an honest chap, though he liked to hear himself talk. He came to see me several times in the late autumn of 1932, when it seemed that his star was rising, and I have him to thank for my knowledge of what happened behind the scenes as 1932 passed into 1933. I will never forget something he said that November, when the vote in the elections had gone against the Nazis, for the first time, after all their triumphs. "He is talking about suicide to frighten his apostles," Strasser said. "He is such a hysteric that they need not take him seriously, and so he will not carry out his threat unfortunately. But it is all or nothing for him now. If I know him, he will make one desperate attempt to get into power. If this fails and he does not get his way, he is finished. He will burst into pieces like a frog." Gregor Strasser paid with his life, in the Rome Putsch, for his opposition. I understand his severed and rotting corpse was found in a cornfield. It is typical of the spiritual state of the German people that when his children were told of the death of their father, the reaction of one was, "He, Hitler, had father shot, but still, he is our Führer." The wife of Strasser's friend Glaser was killed at the same time in his apartment on Munich's Amalienstrasse, had a very similar comment to make about the death of her husband. I have spent a week at Hetzendorf on the Pilsen Sea, visiting my friend Clemens von Frankenstein. Just 2 weeks before the war, Klee conducted a concert in London, and was the guest of Winston Churchill. Those were restoring days for me in the house of my old friend, with the lake melancholy in the late autumn. We talked about the letters, just published, which Stefan George wrote to Hugo von Hofmannsthal, and the incredible arrogance they revealed. I told Klee the details of an audience with George, when the writer, enthroned in an elevated armchair between 2 silver candlesticks, had asked me for my views on Aristotle, and how, 2 hours later, I saw King Stefan in Heidelberg, fat dripping from his mouth as he tore with truly gargantuan zeal into his roast ribs of beef and sauerkraut in the second-class waiting room of the railroad station. And we talked about the curious and almost unbelievable letter in which Herr Hans Pfitzner complained to German theater directors, that he, the German master, was being neglected, while Verdi, that composer of brutal and blood-soaked works, was constantly being played. An interesting comparison, Pfitzner, that ponderous, amateurish composer of amusing music, and Verdi, that he dared to name himself in the same breath and on the same piece of paper with a musical giant whose music streamed forth as effortlessly as his breathing. We talked for a long time about Pfitzner, about the rose-colored paper flowers which he caused to rain onto the opera stage in his Rose vom Liebesgarten, and about the poison in the second act of his Palestrina. I sat in at one of the endless rehearsals for the latter at the Munich Hoftheater. Paul Greiner noticed Pfitzner slinking about the theater, eyeing the seated spear carriers, singers, and assorted supernumeraries, with his nasty schoolteacher's look. "He is writing down the name of everybody who laughs," Greiner said. Pfitzner also had a habit of changing instrumentalists' music. Once he found, above music written for the oboe, the word "garbage." He rushed to the director and demanded the immediate dismissal of the musician. It hardly helped when the oboist was punished with a fine of just 5 marks for the benefit of the pension fund. A violinist at the Berlin Opera told me that recently Pfitzner, having conducted a Verdi aria, at a concert, interrupted the spontaneous applause, saying, "Do not laugh. It is only organ grinder music." It is entirely logical that Pfitzner, that painstakingly mediocre musical watchmaker, should hate the endlessly bountiful talent of a Verdi with the virulence of a dwarf. I have known Klee for almost 30 years, ever since those brilliant days when he was named director of the Royal Theatre, under the reign of the old regent. The way the Nazis removed him from this office in 1934 is instructive. One day, Herr Christian Weber arose in the Munich City Council and declared that the Munich Opera could no longer be considered a culturally significant institution, and that changes must be made. As evidence of the present spiritual state of the German people, I provide here with a comparative summation of the critic and the object of his criticism. Herr Clemens von Frankenstein. Career: composer of operas in the repertoires of various opera houses and known as a conductor throughout the world. Dismissed from his post. Address: a small and modestly furnished villa in the Westpole section of Munich. Herr Christian Weber. Career: prior to delivering his judgment on the state of the Munich Opera, bouncer at the Blue Boar Tavern, convicted several times of assault. As a crony of Hitler, now, president of the Munich Racing Association, and owner of a flourishing whorehouse on Sennefelderstrasse, Munich. Address: the Munich residence, in palatial surroundings occupied by Pope Pius VI in 1782. As a further note on the Third Reich, the following is now forbidden by the Führer's orders. 1. Discussion of the private life, past or present, of high Nazi officials. 2. Any presentation of factual evidence before a court in a criminal case which might possibly cast an unfavorable light on one of these newly created demigods. But in the public defamer this verse appears.
The grain has gone to seed. Transformed other nations. Our lives are a degradation. While the bad boys laugh. What has happened before has become true once more. The good have disappeared. The bad are everywhere. Once this misery is broken as is ice, people will speak of it as of the Black Death. Then the boys on the moor will make a figure of straw, will turn pain to delight, and the old horror into light.
This poem, written by old Gottfried Keller in a moment of almost uncanny prevision of things to come, is the most popular of Keller's ballads in Germany today. Everyone knows it, everyone reads it aloud. As a matter of fact, I heard it at Steinig's Tavern in Schwabing, read by old Steinig himself to his astonished customers. The Gestapo is in a fury, but it cannot send a poem to a concentration camp, nor even stop its circulation. We have not yet come to where we can be forbidden to listen to a ballad by Keller.